more cult behavior, having like a picture of Helio up on the wall and bowing to Professor Helio. I've actually been to gyms where they do this, dropped into gyms where they start the class, they bow in, then they all turn to the picture of Helio and they bow to Helio. And it's like, it's interesting.
What's the most efficient path to victory against this particular opponent?
He's dropping off for the choke here. We could see the finish. It's looking tight. Tight at Delbra.
Hey guys, what is up? Welcome to the Essential Jiu Jitsu podcast. I'm your host, Matt Kwan. The Essential Jiu Jitsu podcast is everything you need to know about Jiu Jitsu. And today we're going to discuss tradition in BJJ. We're going to talk about different traditions that are customs in our sport, things that you might want to know about if you're new to the sport, and things you've probably already heard of, and just tear apart some cultish behavior. Before I do that, I'd like to ask you to like, share, and subscribe. Share the show wherever you can. Leave comments in the comment section. It really, really helps. If you want to support or contact the show, check out the links at the bottom. Before I talk about traditions in BJJ, I'd just like to recap my trip to Vegas. I did the World Masters Championship plus Jiu-Jitsu-Con Gi and No-Gi. Jiu-Jitsu-Con is the biggest tournament of the year in IBJJF. I think over 10,000 competitors. I've been there once before. It was a lot of fun at the Las Vegas Convention Center, which is an amazing complex that is 4 million square feet at least, I believe. Last time I went to Vegas, I didn't really enjoy it as much. There's things that I don't really like about Vegas. You know, it's kind of a shithole if I'm being totally honest, but there is a lot of cool stuff there. Lots of money being thrown around and kind of a fake hedonistic lifestyle, but it is fun to get away for a little bit. And had mixed results at the tournament. I won one match in my Masters World division, and then I lost the second match to a guy from GF team. This guy who was doing this very interesting grip that I've never seen before. It caught me completely by surprise. I pulled guard, jump close guard actually, and immediately he went to work on getting this grip. He called it the upper cuff, where he basically takes out your lapel and then wraps it around the same side wrist. And he did it in such a way that the lapel was completely wrapped around my wrist, and then he had like a pistol grip. So when I tried to move it around, it only made the grip tighter. And within about a minute, my wrist was asleep. And from here, he stood up, opened my guard, started passing. I had to turtle. And the entire match, he kept this upper cuff grip that I've never seen before. I tried to circle my wrist out and do all types of things. I couldn't get out. I later found out that he did it to me. He did it to the guy before me and the guy after me before he finally lost in the, I guess it would be the quarterfinals of which would have been the fourth match. It was really, really interesting. He ended up winning by an advantage. I was doing a crab ride right as the match ended, and he kind of landed in my lap, and I had one hook, but the referee didn't think it was enough to give an advantage and take it to a ref's decision. Even if it was, I think you would have still won. This grip was something I've never seen before, and it's kind of interesting when you go and compete internationally, you see different things, right? And this was clearly a grip that this guy used a lot. As I said, he used it in many matches, and it was very, very interesting, and it's kind of cool every now and then, even though you do lose. It's kind of cool to get caught with something completely surprising, something I've never seen before. And I'm definitely going to be playing with that grip. Very, very interesting. I also lost my first match in the Jiu-Jitsu-Con Gi division, lost by 2 points. And I believe it was 2 points. And, you know, like I've said before, my Gi game needs basically completely it needs to be completely reinvented. I feel very confident with my no-gi game, but my gi game at the higher levels is very, very, let's just say it needs work. I need to completely rebuild it. Obviously, I'm very dedicated to jiu-jitsu. I have a lot of jiu-jitsu knowledge, I feel, but I don't have like a strategy in the gi, and that's something that I'm going to be working on over the next little bit. I really want my gi game to be good at the black belt level, not just be a no-gi guy. In the no-gi division, I got silver. I lost to a guy, I can't remember his name, Francisco P something, an Argentinian judo player who is a black belt under Murillo Santana at Unity, I believe. And this guy's very, very good. He won no-gi pans in 2022. I'd actually never heard of the guy. He's actually an older guy. He's 39. You know, I'm 35. And it was cool to see a guy who's almost in his 40s winning this division. And man, he was really good. Basically, I lost by an advantage, and it was because we both pulled guard, and he stood up first. You know, I complain about the IBJJ rule set, and you know, oh, did I really lose because it's such a silly rule? I mean, that's just the way the rules are played. And he was more tactful than me we actually did the thing that is if you've seen the Craig Jones and Oliver Taza reel where the Greek music is playing and they're both double pulling and standing up and double pulling and standing up. We did that a couple times. And as you're doing that, you just think to yourself, you're like, what are we doing here? Like, this is silly. We're both trying to pull, but not, but the first person to come up gets an advantage. So we're constantly sitting down and coming up. And he had seen me pull guard all day. I won 3 matches leading up to that match. And so clearly he read that I was going to pull. He double pulled. I stood up. We did that a couple times. And then finally, I decided to stay down and he took the advantage and then he won by an advantage, right? He played keep away the whole match, but, came forward enough that he didn't earn any penalties. And I almost wish that I had fake guard pulled and allowed him to pull so that I could play on the top position, because I just didn't want to get into a wrestling exchange with this guy. I saw him throw an Uchimata earlier. His leg went right up in the air super fast. I'm like, this guy, if I get in on a single leg on this guy, there's a good chance that he's going to be throwing me around. So I wanted to be very, very careful. Anyways, it was a great trip. In Nogi, I felt extremely confident. Nobody really passed me or anything like that. But again, I'm kind of upset because out of the 4 victories that I did have, I didn't get any submissions. Most of the matches were pretty tight. But all in all, it was a great team building experience. And now I'll be looking forward to a sub-only match that I have in the beginning of October against my friend and foe, Lucas Wilhan. It's going to be a 10-minute sub-only match. And then the following week, we're actually in the same division at the ADCC East Coast Trials in Atlantic City. So that is going to be the weekend of October 14th. And I'm pretty excited about those 2 events. After that, I don't know what else I'm going to do in the year. I haven't thought about it. Some people want me to do Nogi Worlds. That is a possibility, but I'm not really setting my heart on anything right now. Honestly, I'd kind of like a break from competing and just focus on my students. After ADCC East Coast Trials, I've just been in camp for months now, and I kind of just want to chill as the holidays are coming up. Okay, let's talk about tradition in BJJ. So what is tradition? Traditions are customs or beliefs that are passed down through generations, okay? And this isn't just for jiu-jitsu. As we all know, we probably have some family traditions and, things within your circles of friends. Really what traditions are is they're done to sort of pass knowledge on to the next generation and also to remember your roots, remember where you came from. In the history of BJJ, we saw the importance of these figures, these figureheads that constantly pass down the information. This was before the time of mass media and the explosion of the technology surrounding information. You can go on Google and Google anything now. YouTube, there's just free content everywhere. Everyone has access to infinite content, basically. And back in the day when it was, in the early 1900s and whatever, and Japanese jiu-jitsu became judo and all of that, we discussed in episodes 13 and 14, there really wasn't a lot of mass communication for this type of content. It was all about your instructor passing knowledge down to you, the senior ranks passing knowledge down, and that's how the knowledge survived. Nowadays, we're so lucky that we have these records that anyone can get, DVDs, instructionals, online subscriptions. The information is just more available than it ever is. And sometimes we take it for granted. We forget about how important traditions used to be in a time when we didn't have access to stuff like this. Whereas now, we kind of take things for granted. Oh, I could learn that just by logging into my Mendez Brothers account and see what they're doing, right? But that was not even a thing 10 years ago. Or I guess Marcelo Garcia in Action was kind of the first online subscription. And you could look at that. That was one of the main pioneer online subscriptions 10 years ago, I would say. But now it's just everyone's getting on the information train, and you can just get content all over the world now. So it's very much, I would say, becoming more common that tradition in jiu-jitsu is not as prioritized as it once was. But is it still relevant in modern BJJ? I mean, I think it is. I know a lot of people who like to train at the gyms that they train at because it's more traditional, or vice versa. People like to train at the gyms they're at because it's not traditional. Okay. My gym is pretty middle of the road and it's pretty non-formal, but there's a lot of different schools with different traditions that we'll be discussing today. Just remember that every team, every lineage, every school has its own customs and traditions. And I guess at the end of the day, it's really up to the discretion of the coach what kind of customs and traditions they're going to have in their academy. I would say that the culture of your team and the lineage, whatever that culture may be, that kind of determines whether or not you will have traditional, customs and rituals. Like I said, I'm somewhere in the middle. I do like some traditions, but I try to avoid basically anything that is related to cultish behavior. All right, let's talk about like Japanese terms, Japanese nomenclature. So using Japanese words for techniques and give credit to the origin of the techniques in Japanese Jiu Jitsu and Judo. I'm guilty of this. As you guys all know, if you've listened to the show, I use Japanese words all the time. There is reasons for that. The main reason is because I like to sound smart, but it also gives my students kind of that jiu-jitsu culture to let them know that it was passed down from a Japanese background, that the moves were developed in Japanese jiu-jitsu and then refined through judo and then refined even more through Fusen Ryo jiu-jitsu. I like to use these terms when, I'm passing on systems, and I think it's important to know all the different terms, English terms, slang terms. You're going to see moves with many different names. For example, if you look at like the 10th planet system, they're constantly renaming tons of things that have alternate names. Like I think the most common one would be like the lockdown. And then you look at Danaher instructionally, he talks about how they call that the scorpion and how that was around before Eddie Bravo talked about it. Eddie Bravo's rubber guard system, he's got names for his moves like the lockdown, the crackhead control, the New York, the zombie, meat hook, like all these really interesting names. And that was, I guess, sort of a system that he developed. And he said, I'm going to name all of these different positions. Because there's English words for these techniques, you may go anywhere in the world and hear people call these moves anything from their Japanese origin names to slang terms, or perhaps the instructor didn't even know the common name for that move and they named it themselves. Oh, I call it this or whatever. I would say it's interesting how different cultures come up with very similar techniques around the world, like different grappling cultures, but they all have different names. So for example, in wrestling, the inside trip, we would call that ochigari. In judo, a hip toss would be an ogoshi, right? So a wrestler might not use the Japanese name for an ogoshi. They might just call it a hip toss, but essentially a hip toss is an ogoshi. And anywhere you go in the world to learn a sport like judo, for example, doesn't matter if it's in Cuba or France or Japan, they're always going to use Japanese words for these techniques. Like I said, it's very common for techniques to have multiple different names in multiple languages. And the reason Danaher gives a very interesting reasoning for the use of Japanese words. He says that Japanese words come with wisdom, in that they are more accurate in describing the techniques. So, for example, certain triangle variations, if I was going to say, do a reverse triangle, if I said reverse triangle, you might think I mean a triangle that's upside down. I might mean a triangle that's from behind. You might think that means many different things. But if I say ushiro senkaku, I mean rear triangle. If I say hantai senkaku, I'm talking about the triangle with the arm on the opposite side. Yoko senkaku refers to a specific side triangle where the arm is in a certain configuration. So same thing with jujigatame. If you call something jujigatame, that refers to the traditional cross arm lock. It actually means cross shoulder hold, but that a jujigatame does not describe a straight arm bar, which is what they call in Japanese udegatame, right? So like an inverted armbar or straight armbar would be udegatame. So if you say udegatame, if you say ushiro senkaku, if you say hantai senkaku, it's more accurate in that you know exactly the position I'm talking about, even though the position might be in a completely different orientation, like maybe we're facing down instead of facing up, etc. So it's just, you don't have to use those words, but I think a big reason why it's still done is to pay homage to the origin of the sport, which is in Japan. But I just use it because it makes me sound cool and makes me seem a lot smarter in front of my students. Just kidding. So facing the wall to tie the belt is the next tradition we're going to talk about. This one, now we're getting into kind of like culty behaviors, okay? I've never been in a gym that does this where you have to go in and face the wall, or you're not allowed to face your instructor, you're not allowed to face the higher ranks, or you're not allowed to face like a picture of Helio on the wall as you tie your belt, right? You're supposed to like turn away and sort of do up your belt when no one's looking. It's kind of a weird thing. I don't really understand this tradition. Obviously at my gym, we don't do this. I assume it's just to show as a sign of respect to your professor and to Grandmaster Helio and Carlos, right? I assume that this tradition popped up either in Gracie Humeta or the GB lineage. And ultimately, I do believe that it is cult behavior, and it sort of reinforces a hierarchy, right? Like, you're a lower rank, don't look at the professor. It's got a strange thing to me. I'm not really sure why that's a tradition, and I don't really know what else it accomplishes aside from reinforcing a hierarchy and kind of letting you know where you are in the pecking order. This type of a tradition, it kind of keeps students in line, and to some degree, it makes them submissive and conform to the team lineage. And again, I'll use GB as an example. I believe that this is something that they do. Face away, don't look at the professor when you do up your belt, face a different direction. Sometimes I get people coming from other gyms and they visit my gym and they do this tradition. And it's interesting. They like turn around, and now I'm looking at them from behind and they're doing up their belt. And I'm like, I don't know. Or they come in and, okay, thank you, professor. And it's like, yeah, that's very nice, but like, you can just call me Matt. It's not, I'm just a man. I'm not I'm just a black belt. I'm not like some kind of deity or something else, right? Just understand that like this cultish behavior, cults function the best when people feel like they must play a role in maintaining the conformity and the uniformity. So like, there's like a hive mind to being in a cult, and these really big jiu-jitsu chains that have these cult behaviors. And again, I'm going to keep saying GB because they do a lot of shady things, and they're unapologetic about it. They're unapologetic about how they can use these business practices to make a lot of money. And I shouldn't even criticize it, because in terms of a business sense, they're killing it. They're just laughing all the way to the bank. But if they can get their students to buy into this hive mind mentality, then they can get away with sneaky business practices like mandatory uniforms and things like that. And it can lead to even more heinous offenses like abusing students, in extreme cases like sexual assaults. This has happened in my city before in multiple gyms. I'm sure it's happened in your city as well. You hear these horror stories of jiu-jitsu instructors that have a lot of power, and then they're taking advantage of students. And when you have a gym setting that has a cult-like mentality, there's less of a chance that these people are going to get called out and that things will just go by the wayside. So that is a big reason why I think a lot of these organizations like to keep that cult mentality, to have that conformity. Everyone looks the same. You almost don't express yourself through your gear or anything like that. And if you see professor, hitting on one of the students, you don't open your mouth, because you're taught at a young I won't say at a young age, you're taught from the beginning of your journey that, you kind of respect the hierarchy and respect professor at all costs. And I think this is very, very cultish behavior. People who are in cults are less likely to say anything when they see wrongdoing. Okay. And I've seen this time and time again. And again, right now, all the rage is talking about how Danaher was abusive to his ukes. And I'm sure there's truth to that. There has been tons of people coming forward and saying that. You got to keep in mind that this guy came up in a time where, he's coming up under Renzo Gracie, and Renzo is like essentially a gangster who, he grew up in a room full of gangsters. And when I say gangster, I mean like, literally he could be connected, but also they're just like badass thugs. Like, they will beat the fuck out of you, and they probably beat the fuck out of each other in training. So it's probably common practice to have pretty rough training sessions back in the day when Renzo was coming up with his brothers and his dad and everything. And now that sort of trickles down throughout the generations. And could John Danaher get away with something like that now? Like, from what we hear, this was happening like 10, 15 years ago. It's not even that long ago. And now things have become very, very progressive. And just because, again, the mass information and communication, it would be more difficult, I think, to be an abusive instructor, like hitting your ukes or pulling their hair or whatever during demonstrations. Is just probably not going to fly nowadays, thank God, because abusing your ukes and your training partners is not really a cool thing to do, especially when you're in a role like mine, which is like the gym owner, right? I should be, if I do some shady shit at the gym, I should be held to scrutiny just like anyone else. I shouldn't rely on like a cult behavior, a cult mentality to cover for me or to not say anything if I do something that's inappropriate. Okay, let's talk about lining up. I actually wanted to do a mini episode about lining up and is it important to bow in and bow out after every class? And of course, more cult behavior, having like a picture of Helio up on the wall and bowing to Professor Helio. I've actually been to gyms where they do this, dropped into gyms where they start the class, they bow in, then they all turn to the picture of Helio and they bow to Helio. And it's like, it's interesting. I've never trained at a gym full time there, but I have dropped in at a gym that did that. And I think that that's kind of silly. I understand paying homage to one of the main figures in our history, but at the same time, it's like, you start to deitize people and you start to make human people deities and look at them that way. Now you're starting to enter cult territory, in my opinion. So I like to avoid stuff like that. I don't think there's anything wrong with having like pictures of your professor in the gym or the lineage, right? Like if you have a picture of Helio up and then it shows, the next person he taught, and then it's, a couple lines down, it's your instructor because that's the lineage. I don't think there's anything wrong with that at all. In fact, I think it's kind of cool, but to bow to that, to those pictures and sort of almost like enshrine them, I mean, it's kind of cultish. I don't think Helio would care if everyone bowed to him every time. At least I hope he did. He wouldn't have. I kind of have mixed feelings about lining up. We line up in the kids class and we line up in the fundamentals class. The adult class, once they go into the advanced class, we actually don't line up at on guard. And I've thought about doing it. I've thought about coming in, lining up, bowing in, right? Starting class that way. But usually we just get right to drilling, and I may very well implement this ritual at my gym. I think for the most part, this ritual is pretty well received by everyone. You beat the hell out of each other, and then after you line up and you shake hands, and it does kind of tie in a team bond. So maybe let me know in the comment section. How do you feel about bowing in? Is it something that you think is really, really important, or is it something that's kind of outdated and it doesn't really need to happen? Because my gym is pretty relaxed and non-formal, we don't do it. But I try to get the kids to do it because I do think that it builds discipline. There's something, even just like with the little kids, getting them to line up in a straight line and check their toes, make sure their gis are all done up, their belts are done up. This is, I think, a lot more important than when you're dealing with advanced adult classes, because we're looking for that discipline from the kids. Even just getting a kid to keep his belt tied on is sometimes not an easy thing to do. So I think it's important in terms of building character and building discipline for the children. That being said, we don't really do it in adults, and it's kind of difficult to do it sometimes because people leave. At my gym, you're allowed to leave kind of whenever you want. Some people might not be able to stay and spar till the very end. Our classes are 2 hours long. From what I've heard, that's long for a jiu-jitsu class. I don't know. I don't think it's that long. I think that that's pretty standard because there is so much to go over. But I've kind of thought about when I'm going to put bowing in. Do I put it in after the hour of lesson and then right before we free roll so that everyone bows out together and then people still roll? Do I make everyone stay for the whole 2 hours and bow out after that? There are quite often times where after practice we stick around. It won't be uncommon to stick around for 20, 30 minutes, 45 minutes talking about stuff and drilling stuff even after 2 hours is over. So I'm just wondering, what time do you think is the ideal time to bow out? Maybe if the class was an hour long or an hour and a half, I know people probably aren't going to leave early, and so I can pinpoint when would be a good time to bow out. But right now, as it is with 2 hours, I don't really know exactly when to do that. So let's talk about the universal jiu-jitsu handshake, the slap bump. So the slap bump is like, you go anywhere in the world and train BJJ. If you compete anywhere in the world, you're more than likely going to come across the slap bump. And we all know what this is. It's a universal handshake. It's a showing of respect and fair play and good sportsmanship and all that shit. It's the equivalent to bowing in judo or in other traditional martial arts. And I think BJJ is more it was refined in Brazil and whatnot. And so these were not really traditional or super well-developed areas. They were a lot of the times poorer areas, and it's more of a relaxed handshake. Another thing you'll see is the shaka, right? The hang loose. That's very, very common. I think that's kind of like definitely from tropical regions of the world, like Brazil. And, I've even seen it in Hawaii and things like that. But I'm not really sure where these traditions came from, but like I said, it's commonplace around the world in BJJ for some reason. Bowing, sometimes, you do see bowing quite often, but the slap bump is almost every time. I think the simple fist bump or the pound, it can be traced back to like 1800s when boxers would fight and they would touch gloves before. It's very, very similar, right? Sometimes in jiu-jitsu, you don't even see slap bump. You just see the guys touching gloves or giving each other a pound. And, sometimes people take advantage of this. You see it in MMA, you see it in jiu-jitsu. Guys go to slap bump, and then they use that opportunity as a chance to surprise their opponent and close the distance and get a hold of them. And of course, I find this incredibly distasteful. Let me know in the comments if you think that's distasteful or if you've ever done it before. And if you have, shame on you. But at the same time, you know what? Defend yourself at all times, because anytime you close the distance, whether it's grappling, MMA, a fight, you have to have a good enough stance that you are prepared for things like that, because you never know what your opponent's going to do. Even if most of the time it's all respect, we don't want to be letting our guard down just because we're touching gloves and now we're in a bad position. And is it dirty? Yes. But is it allowed? Also, yes. Okay, we'll talk about abusing ukes again for another second. So, I've never understood the desire for abusing an uke. Like I was saying, the Robert Deagle story about Danaher and like pulling hair and slapping, and they're all like, yeah, that's commonplace. Like that happened all the time. It's like, I personally think that's just likely due to reoccurring trauma, right? It happened to you when you were coming up. Your professor was a dick to you. He was slapping you, treating you like shit. And so you are now repeating the trauma, right? It's just a cycle of trauma. The student who was abused now becomes the master and pays it forward. And it used to be more common than it is now. Okay. I would like to think nowadays that shit won't fly, because, that's one of the good things about our overly hyper progressive society, is that you can't get away with shit like that. That's actually a good thing. That really, in my opinion, has no place in jiu-jitsu. I love gallows humor. I love locker room talk. I was a chef. I love offensive jokes. I'm not PC, but as long as it's in good fun and, there's still respect being shown, it's when things get real disrespectful or downright abusive where you're like, hey, this is not cool. And someone should say something or at least just leave, and sort of let people know about what's going on in some of these schools. Cause I'm sure to some degree it does still happen. I could never imagine like slapping or abusing someone in front of people, putting them down physically or emotionally. It's just, I feel like people that do things like that nowadays kind of get what they have coming to them. And, usually what'll happen is you just lose a lot of business if it catches word that you are abusing people. And if it's a real cult, it will just continue and no one will say a thing. And I think that's kind of what happened in the Blue Basement with these stories of Eddie Cummings and whatnot. I always wonder, like, back in the days of, let's say Henzo, and even before his time with Carlos and Helio, like these guys were like family that were basically beating the shit out of each other in a padded room. And I'm wondering, like, well, is this type of behavior, was it more acceptable back then? I think it probably was, because life was harder and people were more, there was a lot more difficulty and struggle in these lives. The comfort level is not the same. The comforts that we experience today and our quality of life is much higher today than it was back then. And so it was probably normal to display this type of behavior to people back in the day. And nowadays, everyone's so extremely comfortable with life that, if we see things like that, we kind of freak out, and rightfully so. I don't like abusing people, not only because it's not very nice, but it's not a part of a Kaizen mindset. It's egregious and it is ineffective. It doesn't really improve anyone. It doesn't make the person who's abusing someone any better at what they're trying to do. It doesn't make the abused any better. It doesn't enhance their training. It's just purely a power move that is to establish hierarchy and to reinforce the power of the cult and the power of the senior ranks. Okay. And anything like that, it leaves a bad taste in my mouth. I couldn't imagine going to a place like a Jiu Jitsu academy, a place where you want to let off some steam and make some friends and have a good time. And now there's people, you got to worry about being uke and getting slapped around. It's just, it's gross. Okay. Here's a tradition you've probably heard of: not asking higher ranks to roll. I've never actually had this happen to me before when I was a lower rank. I've never been turned down by a higher rank when I ask them to roll, but I've heard of older practitioners that I know talk about that happening when they were junior students. And I assume this was thought to be kind of a disrespect towards the higher rank, or kind of a waste towards this, a waste of the senior rank's time, right? Like, how dare you waste my time, you white belt, come in and ask me to roll? Like, I'm here to roll with the higher level guys. When you earn some stripes or when you get your blue belt, your purple belt, then come see me, right? That being said, there certainly are white belts who are spazzy and downright intolerable when it comes to training partners. But I think that it's still important that the higher ranks train with the lower ranks. I think that there's kind of two types of people in this world. There's those who really only care about themselves, and then there's those who want to help others. So if you're one of those people who only cares about yourself, you're probably going to like that rule. I do know people who I've trained with who have been like brown belts and stuff, and they've been like, hey, what do you think about rolling with like brand new people? And I'm like, oh yeah, like it's part of my job. I'm a gym owner. And they're like, yeah, I fucking hate it. I just don't do it. I'm like, okay, well, that's fine. You're just someone who like only cares about your progression. But if you care about other people's progression, or if you're like me, your job is to help other people's progression, it's kind of an important thing that you try and train with everyone regardless of rank. Okay. But I do like to have like fundamentals classes, so there's a place that those lower ranks can go, so that they're not just jumping head first into advanced classes. By the time they get to the advanced classes and they're exposed to the other ranks, they already have a couple stripes. They've already got 6 months or even a year under their belt of training, and they're more well prepared than if they're just second day white belts, right? But like I said, the healthiest gym cultures, I think, come from places where the higher ranks are comfortable rolling with lower ranks are comfortable asking the higher ranks to roll. I've even had lower ranks come up to me from other gyms, and they're like, oh, is it okay if I ask you to roll? And they're like kind of timid. And I'm like, oh, you're at a gym where like you weren't supposed to ask higher ranks to roll, weren't you? And they're like, yeah, it was kind of like frowned upon, right? So that is definitely a tradition that does exist. And it can be intimidating, going into your first or second class, and you're just trying to fit in. You're like, man, I'm going to get fucked up today. Like, I just want to survive. I just don't want to look stupid. I just don't want to piss myself when I'm getting choked out. And now we're making these black belts out to be like unapproachable, which is kind of how it is. It's intimidating when you're a white belt to see a black belt. You're like, oh, like that person knows a lot, or at least they've given a lot to the mats. And it can be intimidating enough to go up and approach these people. But I believe like being a black belt means that you are more than just an experienced student or a high level practitioner. Like, I believe part of being a black belt is you kind of have a duty to lift others up and share what you know. Like, I believe in the golden rule, right? Like, treat other people how you want to be treated. And just think back to when you were starting out. We were all there, maybe if you're listening to the show, maybe you're a white belt, maybe you're a black belt. Maybe you've got 10 years experience. Can you remember back to your first day when you walked in and you didn't know anything and you were scared, and like I said, you just wanted to fit in and not fuck up? Like, wouldn't you want someone to welcome you in and say, hey, like, I can show you some stuff. Come see me. Like, if there was like a higher rank who did that, like, that would be very, very positive in your life. You would remember that person, and it would enhance your training, and you would have a very, very good impression of the people in jiu-jitsu. But if you go in and you ask, oh, professor, like, would it be okay if we roll? And they're like, what? You're a white belt. Get away from me. You're going to be like, oh man, like, that kind of, is that how they all are in jiu-jitsu? Is that how everyone is? So I maybe I'm just a nice guy, but I tend to think that is not really the conduct of a black belt. Does that mean that a black belt can roll with all of their students? Not all the time, but at some point, I believe all gym owners should try to roll with all of their students regardless of rank. Okay, this next tradition is very, very funny. And to be honest, I don't really know much about it, but I figure it has to have an honorable mention, and that is the pineapple. So the pineapple, should you bring a pineapple to your first class in jiu-jitsu? This is like, it was originally a Reddit joke, and I think the guy's name who did it, his name was Reddit, and he called himself a red belt or something. And the joke was that you must bring the instructor a pineapple on your first day. And I actually saw some documentation that said back in the day in Brazil, people were pretty poor, and they would actually bring fruit as a gift to the instructor when they went and did jiu-jitsu. Now, whether or not there's weight to that claim, I don't know. But regardless of whether or not that was true, the joke kind of stuck. And now the pineapple is kind of a symbol in jiu-jitsu that is a symbol of kind of like an inside joke. It's a lighthearted joke that has somehow embedded itself in Brazilian jiu-jitsu culture. And I would say that most people actually, few people actually know about this tradition, but there's definitely a large chunk of the BJJ population that knows about the pineapple. And, if you bring your instructor a pineapple, he might look at you and laugh, or he might be very, very confused. Okay. Anyways, I just thought I'd mention that one because it is kind of funny, right? Okay. Let's talk about loyalty and the Creonte. Am I saying that right? Creonte. Creonte is a word in BJJ that kind of means traitor, or it's synonymous with a traitor or a Benedict Arnold. The coining of this term is credited to Carlson Gracie, who has taken this term from a Brazilian TV soap opera. I believe it's called Mandala. And there's a character in Mandala who he kind of has like, he's kind of a two-faced guy, and his loyalties change all the time. And so I believe this guy's name was Creonte. And it's a term that was used by Carlson Gracie to describe people who train with other people from other gyms, or someone who will leave their team or start a gym without the consent or the blessing or the lineage of their professor. Essentially calling people this deters them from cross training, and it builds a cult-like allegiance to the team or professor. And if you think about it, it's not that hard to see why this term was created and why this was a thing that Carlson Gracie said it. Why Carlson Gracie said it? Because at the time, moves were kind of secret. Like if you knew how to do an arm bar that your opponent didn't know, it was like a sneak attack. Like jiu-jitsu was not as systemized as it is today. There was no Juji Gatame Enter the System by John Danaher, right? Where this information is for everyone to see. You can see how John Danaher teaches his arm locks to his students. It's like, no, this gym, like we have special techniques that have been developed, and it's very, very valuable information. And if you pass it on to people down the street, you're a fucking traitor. And, we want you to keep these secrets. And that was kind of the idea of it. Nowadays, I think people use this term, or at least this term is used as a joke. But I do know some people probably feel this way when it comes time to their students cross-training at other gyms. They're calling them Creontes because they're afraid to lose customers. Maybe a student goes to a different gym and they learn a completely new style, or like they go to a gym and everyone's attacking the legs. And it's like, man, at my gym, no one attacks the legs, right? So, maybe I want to get some more cross training in with these guys because I want to get better. And it's like, well, now you're a traitor because you're training with the enemy. Or vice versa, if you possess leg locks and you go to a school where nobody knows leg locks and you start showing them things, if your professor taught you that, then if he's really old school and a dick, he's going to be like, hey, don't share our systems. That's our information. I don't want you going down the street and sharing this stuff with my competitors. So they're kind of afraid to give their knowledge out. And they're also afraid to lose customers, losing students to other gyms. So professors with big egos, they want to maintain like this cult-like isolationist mentality for their students and try and prevent this cross-pollination, right, between their schools and other gyms, and sometimes even competitions. For example, GB, again, I'll use GB as the the cult throughout this episode. If you're a member of GB, I have no ill will against GB. I actually admire a lot of how they systemize their business practices, but it's pretty obvious that they have cult-like behaviors. And GB CompNet is no different. Like having a tournament where only people from one school can compete at, I think is, I've always found it strange. I've always wanted to go to one of those GB CompNets and like compete and be like, oh, you can't. I'm like, why? They're like, you're not at GB. I'm like, don't you guys want to try to fight like Jiu Jitsu from other schools? Because if you guys are all teaching the same systems, why would you want to only test yourself against your own systems? Why wouldn't you want to see like how your systems stack with systems of other schools? Other schools have prioritized other aspects of the game, and maybe they think there's other forms of jiu-jitsu aside from the one that your school shows. Why wouldn't you want to like prove your system against their system? Why only have GBs in one competition? For me, it never really made sense. I've always thought it's kind of a clown shoes, a cult-like thing, that would be like, I don't know. it's just, exactly what I'm saying. It's odd to me. In terms of loyalty, like, oh, you're a Creonte, you're a traitor, you're not loyal. I believe that loyalty is earned and it should be earned every day. So your instructor, it's up to your instructor to make sure that everyone wants to train with them. It's not like he's owed their allegiance or he's owed their credit card information just because they decided to sign up with him. The truth is if you're training somewhere and you can find better training somewhere else or training that's more enjoyable somewhere else, we have the free market nowadays and you should go somewhere else. I think people shouldn't really be loyal to like a logo or a team or a person just because they joined an academy. But that being said, if people do leave your gym, if you're a gym owner and people are leaving your gym, ask yourself, like, why did they leave? Because improvements can be made to your program. And lastly, I would just wish them well. Don't hate people for not liking your type of training. I think I run one of the best schools in the area where I live in Vancouver. And I have had people leave because they didn't like things that I did. They didn't like certain training methodology. They didn't like, the level of training or my approach to training. And that, honestly, it's fine. If you start getting upset every time you lose a student, that's when you're going to lose a lot of sleep and you're going to be more stressed out than you should. Just wish them well and ask them like, hey, like, what did I do wrong? Just so I know. And so I don't repeat that process. But again, doing something like that, it is damaging to the ego when someone says, hey, you know what? I'm just not having fun. I'm just not learning. But that's fair criticism, right? Okay. Let's talk about this one. This one always makes me laugh. Kind of not tapping to leg locks or looking at leg locks as a dirty technique. Leg locks were considered dirty and poor technique back in Brazil, right? And there was a time when you used to be able to land heel hooks in the gi, but it was kind of looked at as dishonorable to resort to attacking to the legs. Like, how dare you attack my legs because your technique's not good enough to actually beat me with real jiu-jitsu? This was kind of the mentality. But the truth is that leg locks are super effective and they're part of a complete jiu-jitsu game. And leg locks have real devastating consequences when you apply them well. You injure someone's leg in a real fight. Now they can't stand, they can't kick you, they can't chase you. I mean, that's pretty effective. Or in a jiu-jitsu situation, we all know how effective the modern landscape of leg locks are and how prevalent it is in modern jiu-jitsu. And so how can we pretend that it's not good technique? How can we pretend that it's not a legitimate part of the game? It's literally, as the old adage is, it's 50% of the body. So if you think that being forced to tap out to leg locks is embarrassing or dishonorable, honestly, like, you're probably in denial, or your gym doesn't like leg locks in general. Or you're just like a low IQ individual who just doesn't think for themselves. Excuse me. Just like anything in BJJ, you have to adapt and learn the most current systems. Leg locks are a great example of that, or 10 years ago, barambolos. Any system that you're lacking in, if you don't know it, your competitors will exploit it. And that is why we see so much of this going on in the challenge fights throughout the history of BJJ, episodes 13 and 14 of this show. We see challenge fights constantly being the measure of legitimacy in grappling, all the way from Japanese Jiu Jitsu through to the evolution of Brazilian Jiu Jitsu. Again, check out episode 13, 14. Everything had to do with challenge fights. That's where they went in. And so when I see things like CompNet, where it's GB versus GB only, it's like, you guys are challenge matching yourself. Like, where's the diversity in the styles of jiu-jitsu? Don't you want to see who's jiu-jitsu's best? Yeah, we want to see who's jiu-jitsu's best, but they all have to be under the GB umbrella. You know what I mean? They all have to have the same systems. They all have to wear the same uniforms, the same customs, bow to the picture, eat the cracker, yada, yada, yada. Okay, let's talk about the gauntlet. We used to do the gauntlet at my school. We stopped doing it. The gauntlet, let's call it what it is. Let's call it spade a spade. It's a hazing ritual, usually done at belt promotion ceremonies. And this could be, I've heard of throwing happening in the gauntlet. I know people who were thrown when they were given their brown belt, like their professor would come up and throw them how many times, or everyone would line up and throw them. I mean, to be honest, it sounds kind of cool, but it's dangerous and you're taking damage to your body that is kind of silly. And if someone doesn't know how to throw you, or they throw you really hard, I think it's kind of silly. Another one is whipping, and whipping is very, very common. I know people who still do whipping at their school. We used to do the whipping. It's become less popular over the years. And I think whipping, I actually like it, but at the same time, I can understand why it's unpopular, because when we were doing whipping at our school, one of my coaches, he will go unnamed. He was really into whipping, and like he looked at that as a moment to like whip you hard. Like, I assume again it was from trauma that was reoccurring. He came up and every time he got a belt, he got whipped, right? Like at my brown belt ceremony, that was the day that I opened On Guard Academy. That was in 2015. I opened the gym and there was like fucking probably 100 people there or more. It was huge. And I got whipped twice by every one of them on the way down the line and on the way back. And like, it fucking sucked because not everyone, you know, when you got like 100 people whipping you, not everyone is concerned about your safety. They're just whipping as hard as they can. Some people whipped really hard. Whenever it's a belt ceremony, I never whipped super hard. I always try to like, maybe a couple times I did, but for the most part, it would be respectful. You know, stay away from the junk, stay away from the face. I've seen guys get hit in the face with belts as they're walking by. I've seen people who are doing the whipping get whipped because the person next to them's belt smacked them right in the eye. Like, it's just, there's a lot of liability to it. And, you know, I've also had students come to me being like, I want to be whipped. And I'm like, I totally get that. That is cool. It's like a rite of passage. Like I said, some schools do it, some schools don't, but we abandon it because there is a level of stress involved with the gauntlet, with whipping. And when I give someone their belt, I feel like that's a day that should be mostly happiness, right? It shouldn't be a time where it's like, yeah, this is a really happy day. It's great, but it's going to hurt a lot too. There's going to be a lot of pain. It's like Christmas morning. It's like, yeah, we're going to have a great Christmas morning. You're going to get that fire truck you want, but your dad's going to whip your ass with a belt before you get it. It's like, it does kind of put a bitterness into the day. And I think that, you know, when the day you get your brown belt or your black belt or whatever, it's like, it'd be better if in my opinion, if you got your belt and then everyone comes up and hugs you and says how much you mean to them as a training partner, and they want to take pictures with you, and, you know, and you're getting really kind, like, that's just so much more up my alley than like, let's line up and inflict pain on you for no reason. And you might get hit in the balls. You know, you're going to leave with welts all over your body. It's just, you know, we used to do it, but we've moved away from it. Let me know in the comments what you think about whipping and hazing and the gauntlet. Okay. It's just, and guys, please leave comments right now. If you're listening, wherever you are, if there's a comment section, leave comments because I do read the comments. And it, like I said, it helps this, my algorithms a lot. Okay. This next ritual is pretty funny. Not washing your belt. Very, very common ritual. And I'll be honest, I don't wash my belt after every practice, but I do wash it, I would say, every second or third practice. But I've never understood the idea of like never wash your belt. I guess the idea was you kind of wash the experience out of the belt. And just remember that a belt is a fabric and it can hold a lot of bacteria. You don't wash your skill away in the laundry, just so you know. Like, your belt can harbor staph and ringworm and all types of different bacteria and pathogens that are harmful potentially, and it can stink like any other piece of fabric that's been soaked in sweat hundreds of times without being washed. So it's kind of silly to not wash your belt. I don't think they need to be washed every time, but they probably should be washed. I can remember there's a guy I used to train with, this black belt guy, this old school guy. And like, I remember when he would lay the whooping on me and he would be in top side control, and I'd be like, I can smell this guy's belt. Like it badly. And I just knew, I'm like, this guy doesn't wash his belt like ever. And like I said, it's tradition I don't really understand. Personally, as soon as I got my black belt, I started buying a bunch of black belts. It was like I wanted one that had a white bar. I wanted one that had my name on it. I wanted one that had kanji on it. I wanted one that was just a flat red bar. I wanted one that had no bar, that was just black. Like I have like 15 black belts. Black belts are a great gift for black belts. If you give them a new belt, it's like really, really nice. So I don't really see the whole thing about, the cleanliness of my belt defines my skill or whatever. It's kind of a silly tradition to me, and I don't really like it too much. Okay, we got one more thing to talk about. Maybe I've missed some. Again, if I've missed a tradition that you are aware of, please leave it in the comment section. I would love to hear from any of you guys, or email me, as you can find in the link below, some of the traditions that you guys might do at your school. I tried to think of all of them, but of course I could miss them. The last one we're going to talk about is os. So os is a word that we use in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu. I use os a lot, kind of as a joke, but also not really as a joke. It's kind of a cool word. I abuse the use of os. I'm not going to lie. What does os mean? Os has like a lot of meanings, actually. Some people say it means yes, or thank you, or I understand, I acknowledge you. But the best definition that I have of os is one of my buddies who's a Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu black belt. He came from a Kyokushin karate background, and he said that they always used to say os or ossa back in karate. And I've even sat in on some Kyokushin karate classes at his school before he started teaching jiu-jitsu. And every time he would give an instruction to the class would respond in unison with os, as in like, I understand. I acknowledge what you just said. Yes, I get it. I've had people say os after I complimented them on their technique, right? Oh, that was amazing what you did there. And os, like, thank you. I appreciate that. The definition that he gave me for os is, I will persevere regardless of the difficulty. So I never forgot that, right? Like when I think of os, yes, I mean, it makes me think of like acknowledgement or just saying yes, or even saying hello or goodbye. But one of the main things I always will remember is the idea that I will persevere regardless of the difficulty. And I think that is a very Kyokushin mindset, given how brutal the sport of Kyokushin karate is. They're kicking each other in the head and punching each other in the stomach, constantly kicking each other in the legs, into the body. Essentially kickboxing, but you're not allowed to punch to the face, right? And so os is something that is really stuck in Brazilian Jiu-Jitsu culture. You see, again, just like the slap bump handshake, it is just as common, I would say, as something like that. Everyone knows about os. Most people, to some degree, well, I won't say that. A lot of people say os, but I would say most people have heard of os. And that's something that I always get parents asking me, they're like, what does os mean? And I'm like 10 different things. But it kind of means whatever you want it to mean. For me, I just say it. I just abuse it too much, kind of because it's funny. And, I want to sound smart and have inside jokes that no one else gets. All right, guys, that's basically the episode. So we talked about the traditions in BJJ. It's my fucking cat doing something that's really annoying while I'm trying to record an episode. We talked about a lot of traditional things. I think there's some place for tradition in BJJ for sure. My cat is rattling around this globe plastic ball right now. And I apologize for the disruption. He might do it again. I understand why traditions are made, probably in a time when, like I said, it was more common to keep secrets and to keep secrets and to pay homage to those who kind of paved the way. Nowadays, I find the next generation, they don't really have a lot of respect for the previous generations and or their roots or their traditions. They kind of just, we're kind of used to just getting everything right now, right away. We're used to our comforts and mass information, and we do take it for granted. And so I think that tradition has become less important to people on a whole nowadays. But like I said, I've had people who told me that they joined GB, they left other gyms and joined GB because it was more traditional and they loved the mystique behind the tradition of jiu-jitsu. So it kind of all depends what kind of culture you want to surround yourself with in your jiu-jitsu journey. And I don't think there's anything wrong with traditions being in jiu-jitsu as long as it's not immoral or poor business practices or cult-like behaviors. Other than that, guys, that is the show. If you like to support the show, please subscribe to my online academy. If you really like the show, please support the content because that's the best way to do it, and support what you like, or else one day maybe it goes away, right? Like, I don't make a lot of money on this, and you'll have access to all of my content, all my competition footage, technique breakdowns, kids courses. If you run a gym, there's a lot of information in there about kids courses and how I do my belt promotions, etc. It's only $10 a month, guys. It's only 2 Starbucks coffees a month. Why not put that into the show? It helps me keep the lights on. And if you want to support or contact the show, please just check out the links on the bottom. Other than that, I really appreciate you guys being with me. And remember, the Jiu-Jitsu, blah, 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 the Essential Jiu-Jitsu podcast is everything you need to know about Jiu-Jitsu. Guys, that's my time. I'll see you later. Bye.